Welcome, dearly beloved luminous souls. One misstep can obscure your path, but one insightful act can liberate you from eons of shadows. Did you know that in the realm of quantum physics, entanglement suggests that two particles can be linked in such a way that they share the same fate regardless of the distance between them? Imagine applying that principle to your spiritual journey. A single conscious shift within yourself can ripple outwards, affecting the entire fabric of your existence and the destinies connected to yours, chosen one. That's precisely what you've achieved. You haven't merely made a choice. You've initiated a quantum leap, a spiritual realignment so profound it transcends the limitations of ordinary perception. The forces that sought to bind you remained oblivious as the very foundation of their dominion crumbled. Like architects who return to find their meticulously crafted structure inexplicably reduced to dust, they are left bewildered, grasping at shadows, and somehow you were already soaring. They envisioned a game of strategy, but you were the one who quietly redefined the game, setting a new paradigm that rendered their rules obsolete. And today, we are going to unveil precisely how you shattered every entrenched pattern with a single transcendent act, and why they will never be able to reconstruct the prison you dismantled. Number 1. You didn't just interrupt the cycle, you transmuted the very essence. You didn't just halt the pattern, you alchemized the foundational elements that sustained it. This vital distinction is often overlooked. Many attempt to break free by confronting patterns directly when they manifest. But the reality is that as long as the underlying structure persists, the pattern retains the potential to regenerate. It's akin to demolishing a building while leaving the original blueprints intact. Inevitably, someone will rediscover and follow those plans, rebuilding the same edifice anew. Your approach was far more transformative. You delved into the core, into the unseen, and dissolved the very matrix that gave rise to the pattern, leaving nothing to reconstruct. This explains why certain individuals from your past find their old tactics rendered powerless. They persist in employing the same emotional triggers, the same manipulative strategies, the same recurring dramas that once ensnared you. But now their efforts are akin to activating switches on a disconnected circuit. Frustration mounts as nothing yields the intended effect, and they struggle to comprehend why. They attribute it to a superficial change within you, but the shift is far deeper. You eradicated the foundation that provided their games with a platform to exist. Transcending the cycle at its origin means severing the energetic contract between yourself and the problem. Formerly, there existed an unspoken agreement, a subconscious resonance with the pattern that facilitated its access to your life. Now that connection is severed, the contract nullified, and the doorway it once utilized has been sealed. Consequently, even temptations that once held irresistible allure no longer register with the same intensity. It's not merely a matter of willpower. It's the undeniable consequence of having effectively suffocated the pattern, depriving it of its lifeblood. Few acknowledge the profound energetic expenditure required for this profound transformation. Venturing into the depths where generational wounds and spiritual agreements reside is not a glamorous endeavor. It demands a level of self-awareness that eludes many. and a willingness to relinquish the version of yourself that once sought solace in dysfunction. Parts of your identity had to undergo a symbolic death, ensuring that nothing within you resonated with the antiquated structure. This is what ensures its permanence. You didn't simply combat the pattern, you evolved into an entity that could no longer accommodate it. And now the spiritual landscape surrounding you has undergone a metamorphosis. That blueprint is gone forever, and as a result, the chains that bound others for decades will never have the right to claim you again. Number 2, you elevated the battlefield to a dimension they cannot perceive. You relocated the conflict to a realm beyond their comprehension, and this single strategic shift altered everything. Most conflicts recur because they are perpetually waged on the same familiar terrain, the same emotional vulnerabilities, the same mental triggers, the same predictable points of attack. This constitutes the comfort zone of the adversary. They are intimately acquainted with the terrain, the vulnerabilities, and the precise methods for setting traps. The predicament lies in the fact that as long as you continue to engage in battle within that same arena, you are fighting on their terms. Your accomplishment was to dismantle that implicit agreement. You ceased appearing where they anticipated and elevated the conflict to a dimension beyond their reach. This is not about evading conflict. It's about redefining the parameters so comprehensively that the opposing force is rendered incapable of participating. You transitioned from operating on the emotional frequency where they could easily access you. Their taunts, manipulations, and games continue to be transmitted, but they fail to resonate because you are no longer attuned to that frequency. It's as if they are directing correspondence to an address where you no longer reside. They anticipate a reaction, a defense, a breakdown, but are met only with silence because you are no longer present. That shift was not accidental. You comprehended that energy attracts its own resonance, and as long as you remained immersed in certain emotional states, you remained readily accessible and vulnerable. Therefore, you initiated a deliberate elevation of your spiritual and mental state. This encompasses more than merely cultivating a positive outlook. It entails intentionally directing your focus, consciously selecting your responses, and resolutely declining to engage in unproductive interactions. The higher you ascended, the less visible you became to the tactics that previously influenced you. Now the battlefield lies within your dominion. You are engaging from a position of clarity, tranquility, and strategic awareness rather than chaos. This unsettles them because chaos served as both their weapon and their shield. By refusing to engage on that terrain, you strip them of both, and therein lies the true power of this maneuver. When they are unable to reach you, they are ultimately compelled to retreat or turn against each other as their customary source of power is depleted. By shifting the battlefield, you not only safeguarded yourself, but you transformed their greatest asset into a dead end. Number 3, you became the variable that ancient patterns never accounted for. You became the singular element the pattern could never anticipate, the variable for which it never prepared. Spiritual and generational cycles perpetuate themselves by capitalizing on predictability. They rely on the assumption that under specific pressures, the same predictable responses will invariably follow. They depend on fear manifesting in a consistent manner, pride dictating predictable actions, and pain leading to the same destructive choices. This is how the cycle continues, presuming that each successive individual will follow the pre-established script, often without conscious awareness. However, you deviated from this expectation. Where the pattern anticipated anger, you responded with composure. Where it expected resignation, you demonstrated unwavering perseverance. Where it expected validation-seeking behavior, you distanced yourself entirely. You emerged as the unpredictable factor that disrupts the entire equation. Once this occurs, the pattern struggles to adapt with sufficient speed because its strength lies in repetition, not in adaptability. This transformation didn't arise from life suddenly becoming easier. In fact, it occurred amidst some of your most challenging experiences. What shifted was your level of awareness. You began to recognize how each situation was attempting to steer you toward a predetermined outcome. You started to perceive the setup before it reached its culmination. And instead of conforming, you began to dismantle the chain link by link. Patterns are not designed to withstand questioning. They thrive in the subconscious within individuals who react impulsively. The moment you gained awareness of the maneuvers being employed against you, you shattered the illusion that this was simply the way things were. You transitioned from being a mere piece on the game board to becoming the player who perceives the entire game. Occupying the role of the variable is transformative because it compels the pattern to unravel not only in your life but also in the lives of those connected to you. Once you demonstrate that the script can be rewritten, the so-called curse is exposed as something that was never predetermined. Others may still adhere to it, but they can no longer assert its inevitability because you have shattered it. You have revealed that the moment an individual consciously chooses a different path, the entire equation collapses. That is the moment the pattern realizes it no longer possesses control over you, and it is then that it ceases to exist. Number 4, you deactivated the trigger words of your bloodline. Certain families harbor such deeply ingrained patterns that a single word accusation or recurring scenario is sufficient to unleash years of accumulated anger, shame, or discord. These are spiritual tripwires, invisible buttons programmed across generations to guarantee a predictable reaction. These may manifest as specific topics that invariably provoke arguments, certain phrases that inflict instant wounds, or particular times of the year that consistently trigger strife. For years, these triggers functioned flawlessly because no one considered disarming them. Instead, individuals repeatedly walked into the trap presuming it was normal. You disrupted this pattern, and you did so without fanfare, without publicly announcing your intentions. You identified the patterns, recognized the emotional manipulation, and consciously decided to refrain from taking the bait. This was not an easy task because those triggers were designed to feel intensely personal. They were intended to provoke defensiveness, retaliation, or descent into guilt. However, instead of reacting, you remained still. Instead of mirroring the energy directed at you, you allowed it to pass without fueling it. Initially, this unsettled those around you. They activated the lever, anticipating the customary explosion. And when nothing transpired, they were thrown off balance. The silence, the absence of chaos was unfamiliar to them, but this was precisely the intention. Without the predictable reaction, the entire cycle breaks down. A trigger only possesses power if it elicits a response. By refusing to engage, you severed the connection. This type of transformation transcends merely suppressing your emotional reactions. It entails rewiring your internal responses so that the same words and situations no longer possess the capacity to draw you into the former emotional state. It involves healing the wounds that rendered those triggers effective in the first place. You did not simply cease reacting. You eradicated the part of yourself that could be provoked at all. Now those antiquated tripwires are nothing more than empty gestures. They have relinquished their power not only over you, but also over the future. Because once an individual within a bloodline learns to maintain composure when the trigger is activated, that emotional weapon becomes permanently useless. You have ensured that it cannot be perpetuated. The game has concluded and they are unable to ascertain when it concluded. Number 5, you rewired your spirit to ignore the old summons. There's a reason some struggles feel less like random mistakes and more like something calling you back into the same trouble. Those aren't just habits, though. They're summons. They're invisible pulls in the spirit designed to draw you toward the very cycles you've been trying to escape. They can come in the form of sudden urges, repeating temptations, or coincidences that seem to line up perfectly to get you back where you started. Most people don't even realize they're responding to something beyond the surface. They just feel the pull and follow it. You broke that by changing your frequency. You didn't just tell yourself to stop, you shifted the very spiritual channel you operate on, so those old calls no longer connect. It's like having your number removed from a list that's been calling your family for generations. The line still exists and the calls are still going out, but you can't hear them anymore. That silence isn't accidental. It's the result of deep inner work that reprogrammed how you respond at a spiritual level. This wasn't about willpower alone, because willpower can still hear the call. It just tries to resist it. What you did was remove yourself from the range of the signal completely. You addressed the root of why those summons had access to you in the first place, the unhealed wounds, the unresolved agreements, the subtle attractions to what you knew was harmful. You broke the hidden contracts that gave those patterns the right to call you back. Now, when the old cycle tries to lure you in, there's no reaction, no curiosity, no emotional spark that can be used as a doorway. The chain is gone and the hook can't catch you because there's nothing in you that wants what it's offering anymore. This confuses those who once had an easy path to pull you back into dysfunction. They're using the same bait, the same words, the same setups, but you don't even look twice. The power in this isn't just that you're free now. It's that the summons has lost its future hold. By removing your frequency from the range of that call, you've also ensured that it won't echo into the next stage of your life. The voice is still shouting, but for you, it will forever be nothing more than silence. Number 6, you outlived the expiration date of the curse. Some spiritual patterns don't last forever on their own. They have an expiration date. The only way they survive is by renewing themselves through the next person in line. That's why certain struggles seem to run in the family. It's not that the curse is immortal. It's that someone keeps carrying it forward, whether through choices, agreements, or unhealed wounds. The curse feeds on continuity. It expects each generation to collapse in the same spot so the cycle can start over again. You disrupted that expectation by making it past the stage where it had the most control. For some people, the breaking point is a certain age. For others, it's a season of intense hardship where the weight of the curse is at its peak. In your case, you reached the point in life where others before you gave up, fell apart, or repeated a destructive pattern, but you didn't. You endured what was meant to finish you, and because of that, the curse couldn't refresh itself through you. This survival wasn't just physical, it was emotional and spiritual. You didn't just make it to the other side. You made it without allowing bitterness, addiction, violence, or self-destruction to take root in you. That's what stopped the transfer. Curses can't just attach themselves without consent. That consent is often given unknowingly through our agreement to keep reacting in the same old ways. You denied that agreement, and in doing so, you closed the gate it was trying to pass through. Now the curse is stranded. It tried to wait you out, banking on history repeating itself, but you went beyond its limit. You lived past the point where it had influence, and it can't leap forward because you aren't carrying it anymore. You didn't hand it to your children, your relationships, or your community. You starved it of the one thing it needs to live, a willing host. This is why your life may feel lighter now. Even if everything isn't perfect, that invisible pressure that used to hover over certain seasons is gone. You've outlived its reign, and because of that, it can't touch the future. You broke its chain not by fighting it head-on, but by refusing to fall before its time limit ran out, and now that expiration date has passed forever. Number 7, you refuse to play the villain in their script. Some cycles survive because someone is always willing to play the role they've been assigned. In toxic family systems, broken relationships, or spiritual battles, there's often an unspoken script that everyone knows by heart. You were expected to be the villain. The one who loses control, makes the wrong decision, or says the words that give them ammunition to paint you as the problem. They needed that version of you so the pattern could keep running and their narrative could stay intact. You ended that by refusing to step into the role no matter how many times they tried to provoke you. They tried to bait you with the same insults, set you up in the same traps, and recreate the same situations where they could point and say, "See, they're exactly who we said they were." But you didn't give them the reaction they needed. You stopped delivering the lines they wrote for you. This wasn't about staying silent just to look good. It was about actually changing on the inside so their attacks no longer connected. When they tried to hit the old you, they found out that person didn't exist anymore, and without that person, their whole production fell apart. The arguments they had rehearsed in their head suddenly had no opponent. The scenes they wanted to replay had no energy to feed on. The more you refused to perform, the more awkward and empty their script became. The truth is, some people and spiritual patterns can only exist if you agree to be a certain character. When you stop playing that part, you rob them of their main plot line. You don't just ruin the scene, you end the entire story they were trying to tell. And once that story collapses, they have two options: confront their own role in the dysfunction, or find someone else willing to step in. You chose to rewrite your role so completely that even if they wanted to keep the drama going, they couldn't. You didn't just refuse the part. You burned the costume, erased the lines, and walked off the stage entirely. And without your cooperation, the play didn't just slow down, it stopped for good. Number 8, you learned the language of patterns and then spoke in silence. Patterns don't just operate randomly. They have a language. It's made up of cues, tones, attitudes, and moves that are designed to trigger a specific reaction. Once you understand that language, you realize that every conflict, every manipulation, every repeat of history is following a script. It's like a code where certain words or behaviors are meant to unlock your anger, fear, guilt, or compliance. For most of your life, you responded without even knowing you were speaking back to it. But at some point, you began to see the pattern for what it was. You noticed how the same emotional hooks kept showing up. Even if the faces or situations changed, you learned that a certain tone in their voice wasn't just how they talk. It was bait. You recognized that a certain kind of apology wasn't actually reconciliation. It was an invitation back into the same loop. Once you could see the structure behind it, you realized you had a choice: keep responding and keep the pattern alive, or stop speaking its language entirely. You chose silence, but not the kind that comes from fear or avoidance. This was a deliberate, calculated silence. Every time you refused to respond, you were sending a message. This code doesn't work on me anymore. That lack of reaction wasn't emptiness. It was a complete shutdown of the pattern's communication system. Without your response, the loop lost its fuel. What made this so powerful is that you weren't just biting your tongue. You were breaking the agreement at the root. True silence in the face of a pattern isn't about pretending you're unaffected. It's about genuinely disconnecting from the need to engage at all. The part of you that used to feel the urge to defend yourself, explain yourself, or retaliate was no longer there to be activated. And when a pattern loses its language, it loses its authority. If it can't get you to speak back in the way it expects, it has no leverage over you. That's why this silence was so disruptive. It wasn't weakness, it was fluency. You learned the system so well that you could dismantle it without saying a single word. In the end, your quiet didn't just end conversations, it ended the control those conversations once had over your life. Number 9, you removed the energy source it fed on. Some patterns don't survive on their own. They're not self-sustaining forces, they're parasites. They need a constant supply of emotional energy to keep running. That energy might be your fear, your outrage, your guilt, or even your desperate need to be understood. As long as you kept feeding it with reactions, it stayed alive. The moment you stopped, it started dying. The tricky thing about parasitic patterns is that they make you believe your reaction is necessary. They convince you that you have to defend yourself, that you must explain your side, or that you owe them a certain response. Every time you engage, even when you think you're standing your ground, you're giving it the very attention it's designed to feed on. That's why it kept coming back stronger. You were unknowingly keeping it alive. You broke this by cutting off the energy supply entirely. You stopped explaining yourself to people who didn't want understanding. You stopped letting your fear dictate your moves. You stopped giving your outrage away for free every time someone poked at your peace, and because you no longer gave it what it wanted most, your emotional involvement, the pattern began to wither. It didn't die with a dramatic crash. It didn't even announce its end. It faded quietly, losing strength day by day until one moment you realized it was gone. The people or forces behind it might still be trying the same tactics, but without your energy attached. Those tactics are hollow. They can't get the same rise out of you, and that lack of reaction makes them powerless. The beauty of this is that it didn't require a war. It required detachment. By choosing where your energy goes, you became the one in control. And here's the thing. Once a parasitic pattern dies from starvation, it doesn't regenerate in the same way. Without a host, it can't rebuild. You didn't just weaken it temporarily. You removed its lifeline for good. By the time they noticed what happened, it was too late. The parasite was already dead and you had already moved on. They were still looking for a fight, but there was nothing left to fight with. The power was gone because you had taken it back. Number 10, you disrupted the spiritual economy they depended on. Some spiritual patterns operate like a black market economy. There's always an exchange happening, but it's not money being traded. It's emotions, power, and influence. Pain is handed over in exchange for control. Shame is collected in exchange for silence. Fear is harvested in exchange for compliance. Every time you give in to one side of the deal, you're paying into their system, keeping it alive and functional. You broke that by refusing to engage in the trade at all. You stopped giving pain in response to their manipulation. You stopped accepting shame as the price for keeping the peace. You stopped letting fear buy your decisions. This wasn't just about walking away. It was about shutting down the market entirely by making their currency worthless to you. When you do this, the power shift is immediate. Their economy thrives on predictability. They know exactly what to offer or demand in order to get your reaction. They'll stir up conflict to harvest your anger. They'll press on old wounds to make you cave in. But when you refuse the transaction, you remove their ability to gain anything from you. The bait is still dangled, but you're not biting. The invoice is still sent, but you're not paying. The moment you made this decision, their system began to collapse. A spiritual economy can't survive without willing participants. So as we've explored these 10 powerful shifts, remember this: you hold the key to unlocking freedom from the patterns that no longer serve you. You have the strength to redefine the rules, rewrite the script, and create a new reality, not just for yourself, but for generations to come. The power to break free resides within you. Now I'd love to hear your thoughts. Which of these resonated most with you? Have you experienced something similar in your own life? Leave a comment below and let's start a conversation. And if you found this helpful and want to continue on this journey of self-discovery and empowerment, be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future insights and inspiration. Let's keep growing together, growing together, growing together, growing together, growing.